say, that's not really what happened. But they were watching. So I said, how did you get it so wrong? And they said, well, what do you mean? What was wrong? And I said, that person wasn't the one that led that effort to do this or that. And they said, but we were watching on the floor. And I said, okay, you're seeing who's talking to who, but you're not hearing what's being said. And I realized that what they were seeing was not matching the reality. So as I started to do these columns on Inside Baseball, they got printed in 30 papers around the state. So when Florida Voices went out of business, numerous papers asked me if I'd continue writing for them. So I decided to self-syndicate, and that's really what I'm loving doing now, because I love hearing from people. We don't know what's going on, and we want to hear what's going on. We want to hear it in a way that talks to us simplistically, that we can understand, instead of assuming we know something. So I hope that I'm filling that niche in my after politics career. And I loved being in the Florida legislature. And when I was first elected in 1996, the Florida House went Republican for the first time in 122 years. They needed to pick up 5 seats, and they picked up exactly 5, and 2 of them were from Polk County. I was one of them, the other one was Adam Putnam, and both of those seats had never been held by a Republican. So we were 2 of the 5 seats. Another one was here from Hillsborough County, which was Johnny Byrd, and then we had Lindsey Harrington and Nancy Argenziano. With a 61-59 majority in the Florida House, it was the best 2 years I've ever served in the legislature. Every single member's opinion mattered. Every single member had to read the bills, defend their votes, know what they were doing, and if they were to go to their leadership and say, I can't be with you on this bill, then leadership had to say, oh, we may not have the votes, and then you get to actually have a seat at the negotiating table and fix a bill, and then you get a better product, and it passes out, and that's how the system was intended to work. And Dan Webster was the perfect man at the perfect time to lead that transition from Democrat to Republican. He treated people with respect. Democrats, Republicans, didn't matter what your party affiliation was. We worked together across the aisle. There were only a few issues where there was differences, and most of the time we worked together. I love that process. I love working across the aisle. I love making policies better. I like being responsible for my votes. Then the next election, term limits hit. And term limits has had, and I was a big fan of term limits, I voted for it, but term limits has had a very negative effect on the process, because instead of having people who had institutional knowledge of the process and respect for each other, you started getting younger, politically aggressive people who just wanted to make politics their career, which is funny because most of them are the ones who are anti-government, but yet they wanted to stay in the political realm for many, many years and work their way up. And with that, in 1998, the first big group of people left the legislature, and we got all those new people, and our majority grew. And now you had more mouths to feed, everybody's vote wasn't as important, it started to be a little bit more partisan. Then the next election cycle, the Republicans took 2/3 of the House, and at that point, everything became very top-down. Leadership would determine things, and you either went along to get along, or you were considered a maverick and whatnot. But even then, the issues that the leadership was pushing were good, traditional, fiscal conservative issues. So it wasn't hard to go along with leadership. Sometime after I got into the Senate, the issues started to go so far right. Now, I considered myself a conservative. I'm a fiscal conservative, I'm a social libertarian. I considered myself conservative. And when people called me a moderate, I would be kind of offended. I thought, oh, there's nothing moderate about me. But now, if somebody calls me a moderate, I go, yeah, okay, I'll take it. Because I just don't know what's happened to my party. It has moved so far to the right. The talk of negotiation or compromise is such a dirty word. And I was opining to somebody earlier that Jeb Bush, when he makes statements like he has recently about immigration or about the Republicans in Washington shouldn't shut down the government over trying to defund Obamacare yet again, they call him a rhino. Jeb Bush, a rhino? When Jeb Bush is considered a rhino, I feel a little uncomfortable in a party that's being said. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how I think my party is suffering right now. I am still a Republican. I have no intention of leaving the party. But I do think that the party is struggling amongst itself. I think that the biggest problem is they're showing a lack of tolerance for anybody else's opinion. If any of you follow me on Facebook or Twitter, I put provocative things out there, and then people argue. And I noticed that if I sound a little less than Republican, the people who back me up back it up with facts. And the people who insult me do it with name calling. And I thought, you know what, I don't mind if you disagree. And you might even change my mind if you make a good case for it. But this birtherism and this name calling and this spread of misinformation is so frustrating to me. My husband often criticizes me when I deal with the media. He says, well, they can ask any question they want, but you can give any answer you want. But some of us are just in the box, black and white people, and if somebody asks me a question, I try to directly go to that question. And it bothers me when there's so much misinformation spread. So my latest column that printed in the Ledger on Wednesday, and probably will be in the Tribune tomorrow, was on Obamacare. It was on the Health Care Act. It was today's. And it was not my intention to defend it. I'm no lover of the law, but I'm also no hater of the law. But I hadn't done my research. So I ended up in the hospital last week, and I started thinking, oh my God, how am I going to pay for this? And thank God I still have health insurance. They let me keep it when I left the legislature. Well, we were in the legislature, and I don't remember how much I paid a month because they took it out of your pay, but it was something really low, like $20 or $30 a month. Well, when they allowed me to keep it, I now pay $600 a month. And I'm thrilled that I have health insurance, especially with those pre-existing conditions and everything like that. So I see some benefit, but I think President Obama would probably like to make changes to his own plan. But how can he open it up when the Republicans and a faction of the Republican Party is saying there are jack panels and this and this? And so there's no trust, there's no reason for there to be any cooperation. And that's what's wrong with the political process right now. And on the day I'm speaking to you, the Republican Congress is going to defund it again at the risk of hurting our economy. Those are not the types of things that I, as a Republican, want to see our party doing. I was proud of Marco Rubio when he stood up on immigration reform, because you cannot grow a party if you make the tent so small that people aren't welcome. And when you start eliminating minorities, when you start eliminating Hispanics, when you start going after issues like that are important to women, your party's getting smaller. And that lack of tolerance, I think, is really hurting the party. And so I stand before you today, still a Republican, not as proud as I once was, but not willing to leave it, because I think that I speak for a lot of people in the Republican Party. I hear from people all the time that say, I think I'm going to leave the party, and my response to them is, if you do, they win, and the party will, where are you going to go? You know, if you're an NPA or an independent, you can't vote for anybody in primaries. Most Republicans don't want to leave and go to Democrat. There is an exception I can think of. But for the most part, there are a lot of unhappy Republicans. And I think if we all work together, that some of us are speaking for a silent majority. And we just need to be a little bit more tolerant of other people's views. That doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything. But if policy is here, and you want it to be here, and you keep saying no, it's going to stay here. If you compromise, it's going to move here, and the next year it's going to move here. So you're only shooting yourself in the foot, because you're not even making incremental change to where you eventually want to be. It's all or nothing, and that's never been a good proposition. During the time I was in the legislature, I was fortunate, especially in the House. They made me a majority whip twice in the House and once in the Senate. And I was very close to leadership. They moved me up the ranks very quickly. My first committee chairmanship, they put me in environmental protection. I knew nothing about the environment. And quite frankly, it's not that I didn't care. It's just that I didn't know I didn't care. And so when then Speaker of the House, John Thrasher, asked me to be chairman of environmental protection, I went to him and said, look, I don't want to embarrass you. I don't want to embarrass me. I don't know these topics. I know it's a big top-tier committee, but can you put me somewhere where I know something? My background was in insurance. I know financial issues. I'm good with numbers. And he said, you're good at bringing diverse groups together and forming compromise. So I want you to bring the agriculture, development, and environmental communities together. I said, are you kidding me? That's impossible. And he put me in charge, I took it, and I loved it. And came to realize that very few people in the legislature, especially the Republican Party, want to delve into those issues. And water is so important. And we passed such great bills. I authored the Florida Forever Bill. And I authored water policy that was recognized nationally and brought along almost every vote. None of these bills were highly partisan. But there aren't that many Republicans that really want to focus on the environmental issue, which also led to a little bit of my classification as moderate, because anybody who seems to care about the environment seems to be branded moderate. I think that if you don't have an adequate drinking water supply, you die. And that's just a conservative versus a liberal issue. So I think you just need to frame the message a little better. In the Senate, things started changing a little bit. I developed a little bit more independence. Things were going a little far. And my own party was spending too much money. So I voted against my own party's budget 4 or 5 times. And that's not a popular position. But you can't claim to be fiscally conservative and be throwing money at ridiculous things. And some of the projects aren't so bad themselves, but they're not a function of government, like a rowing park in Sarasota, like creating a 12th university in Polk County, when you cut the other 11 university budgets by $300 million and you create a 12th one that has no students, no faculty, and no accreditation. So, sometimes you have to stand up for what you believe in. One of my biggest battles that I faced in the last session that I was in is I was fighting prison privatization. Thank you. You're welcome. And the reason I did that, I served for 3 years as criminal justice committee chair, and I actually went to numerous prisons in the state. And I would not trade places with a corrections officer for all the money in the world. Their job is awful. They are people don't care that prisoners are in unair-conditioned buildings. But that means that everybody that works there is in an air-conditioned building. In Florida, with all those big, burly men. So these corrections officers who do not carry weapons, because the worst thing that can happen is that them getting stripped of their weapon and being used against them. So these corrections officers, among the worst of the worst, and the Florida State prison system has 102,000 adult inmates. That doesn't include federal prisons or county jails. So we have all those people. These corrections officers, which usually are in rural counties, which usually the job goes from father to son to grandson and so on, they start at like $19,000 a year. After being there 20 years, they might be up to $45,000. Worse circumstances, and then to privatize prisons, what you're saying is, we don't want to pay those people $45,000 to $50,000 even though they put 20 years into the system. We want them to pay in for their pensions. We want to take away their health care. And the only way to do that is if we privatize it, they can bring in younger people, pay them $20,000, and all of those people who gave all of those years to the state get stripped of their jobs. And it just wasn't right. And it doesn't make the system any safer. In fact, it makes it less safe. And it doesn't save any money because the money saved goes to their profit line. So it doesn't make any sense. There are some things you can privatize. There are some things that shouldn't be privatized. And the safety and well-being of our citizens dictated that that not be privatized. And they never made a case for how it would save money. They just claimed that the contract would save it would be a 7% savings. So what if there isn't? Or what if there is 1 year and then the next year it's not? So it's a terrible policy. Leadership pushed it, defeated it, and that kind of got me a new reputation in Tallahassee. You don't want Dockery to be against you because she tends to put together coalitions and defeats things. And we did that with Karen Trigger. We did that with Paula. One of the issues that really angered me is when, this was a couple years ago, they tried to split the state Supreme Court into a criminal and civil division, and then they were going to move 5 of the justices over to criminal and then kind of pack the civil portion of it. And we were able to get that part of the bill's constitutional amendment stripped out. So, unfortunately, in the last couple of years, my role in the legislature has been more to stop bad things than to proactively move things forward. And with that, who long for the days of Ronald Reagan, who long for the days of an adult in the room. I think our party will move back there. I just don't know what that tipping point is going to be. So for those of you who feel like you're in the same position as I am in the Republican Party, I urge you not to leave the party, but to make your voices heard so we can gain a little common sense. And with that, I'd be happy to answer anything.